Black and Tan is a podcast that begins each episode with a discussion of a type of beer that relates to the intricacies of today's fast-moving world. Hosted by Pedro Silva, an African-American advocate for social equity, and Alan Ohashi, a Japanese-American with a passion for cross-cultural engagement, the show offers insightful discussions designed to inspire personal change. Through engaging conversations, Black and Tan offers listeners practical advice and eye-opening perspectives on how to better understand others. Welcome to Episode 1. What's in a Name?
Thank you, Sophia, for that introduction. Welcome to Black and Tan, Episode 1. I'm Alan Ohashi, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Pedro Silva. We're excited to kick off this journey with you, but first things first. Why Black and Tan? Well, Pedro is black and I'm tan, so we thought it was fitting. Also, it's the name of one of my favorite drinks made by floating a dark stout like Guinness over a pale ale such as Bass. But if you were to order a Black and Tan in Ireland, you might get some strange looks, even some frowns. There, it's called a half and half. That's because Black and Tan holds a much deeper cultural significance in Ireland. The Black and Tans were a British paramilitary force deployed in 1920 to suppress the Irish independence movement. They gained notoriety for their brutality, and because of that history, the term is considered offensive. And that brings us to what this podcast is all about. Understanding the weight of words, cultural perspectives, and how small shifts in awareness can bring us closer together and bridge social divides. Let's get into it. Pedro, can you give us a little background about yourself? How did you end up in Boulder?
How I ended up in Boulder, the fastest way that I can answer that question is I just say God, and then that's up to other people's interpretation of what I mean by that. But when I say God, I mean the fulfillment of all relationships. And so if there's something that's missing in your life, then what I would call God fills in the gaps. And so I met a person, I fell in love with her a long time ago, and she fell in love with Boulder a longer time ago. And so this place kept showing up in our lives. But prior to meeting her, someone told me independently, I hadn't even met her yet. I was just about to meet her. But a person told me when I was living in Atlanta, Pedro, you're a little different. You don't belong here in Atlanta. You belong in Boulder, Colorado. And I said, Boulder, Colorado? I don't even know anything about that place. And all he could tell me was Mork and Mindy, which didn't tell me much. And then he said he was from Ethiopia, and he said he had passed through Boulder on his way to Atlanta, and he, for some reason, felt like it was a place where I could thrive, which I thought was random. And then I meet this woman that I had been friends with, but never had met in person. I only met her on online on an email and phone calls. And then she talked to me on her birthday, and she said, "You know what I'm giving myself for my birthday?" And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Boulder, Colorado." And when she said that, I said, "Nah, this is weird." And then I thought I should meet her in person. And I met her in person, and long story long, that relationship brought me to Boulder. So that's the long story of it, sort of.
And so I ended up here in around 1993. At the time, I was working for the Northern Arapaho tribe on the Wind River Reservation in west central Wyoming. And I was down in Boulder working on a project. It was something we called the cultural conduit. And what that was my job was to represent the tribe and try to find locations in town that would open up wall space or gallery space for Northern Arapaho artists. And I had worked with a tribal elder at the time named Eugene Ridgely Sr., and he and his son Eugene Jr., and I did quite a bit of work back and forth from Boulder with the idea of finding galleries downtown on the Pearl Street Mall, which we were successful in doing. And I worked with a local nonprofit organization, one that was called the Next 500 Years. This would have been at the 500th anniversary of Columbus coming to the New World, or his New World. And it was a fairly successful project. We had a number of activities going on the mall. We had a teepee lifted that people stayed in. The next day there were dancers and singers and people giving history about the Arapaho tribe and its origins in northern Colorado, particularly the Boulder Valley. So my long story long is I this project lasted for maybe 6 months or a year, and I just decided to move here. And one of the reasons had to do with me being baseball starved for pretty much my entire life, living in Wyoming. And in 1993, the Rockies came to town, and I decided, well, what the heck? Why not step off the edge and moved to Colorado, and so I've been here ever since.
Nice.
The other thing I was thinking we were going to talk about is our names. Uh,
Yeah.
your name is Pedro Silva, and to the
Hmm.
observer, that might sound like someone who is of some kind of Latin descent. And
Hmm.
so tell me, have you ever had any cases of mistaken identity when you meet somebody for the first time, or what do people think when they see a guy like you with the name of Pedro Silva?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had a lot of different experiences with my name. My dad is of Portuguese and Cape Verdean heritage, so that's why my name is Pedro Silva. Is actually Pedro Senhorinha Ramos Montero Silva. So it's a long, complicated name filled with family history, I guess. But I just identify as a Black American. I was raised here. My mom's Black. I grew up in the South in Virginia and Mississippi. But with people with my name were rare in that time. And a lot of times people would assume that I was, even when I was a kid, people, even though to me, I just look like I'm Black. But people would tell me go back to Mexico and all these other things when I was younger because my dad had an accent and they weren't very well versed in people with accents. So they just thought they used to think you're either black, white, or some kind of Mexican. That's what they would say in the South where I lived. And so they decided I was some kind of Mexican. And so they used to tell me where I should be and where I should go. And they could hear an accent in my voice, which they really couldn't hear because I grew up here. But so I had all kinds of things that came with this name. I've been in places waiting for my name to be called. And then I come up to the line and say, I've been waiting forever and no one's ever called my name. And then they would say, well, I don't see you on the list without ever asking me what my name was. And then I'd say, you don't see Pedro Silva on the list? And they'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were Pedro. So I've had way too many experiences with this name. So much so that I was 26 years old when I finally accepted it as my name. For so long tried to find someone, some kind of nickname or something that would stick besides Pedro. And I even have a comedy bit where which is based on something that happened in the airport. And I'll wrap it up with this one. I was getting on a plane and I waited 9 hours for this flight. And this woman said, the ticket agent says, "Oh, sir, finally, we can get you on the flight on this next flight." I was on standby, and I said, "Awesome!" And then she handed me the boarding passes, and I wasn't really looking at the boarding passes. I was just happy to get on the flight. And then as soon as I was about to get on, she ran over to me and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Um, she said, "Your name isn't Dante Williams, right?" And she had given me the boarding passes for somebody named Dante Williams. It's just because I was Black. And then she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is somebody else's boarding passes." I said, "Okay." And then she's like, "Dante Williams," for the Dante Williams to come up and get his boarding pass instead. And then Dante Williams was a white guy. I was like, then I was like, well, look what happened. And I started saying I wish my name was Dante Williams, and I do a comedy bit about that incident and how I wish that I had a name that matched that people wouldn't that they would not put their prejudgments on. So yeah, I've had a lot with the name. How about you, Mr. Ohashi?
Yeah, I have similar experiences. You know, my last name is spelled O apostrophe Hashi, and
Mhm.
my father and his youngest brother, Jake, my uncle, we're the only two parts of the family that have the apostrophe in their names. And oftentimes I'll have, you know, I used to work in the public sector. And so I had a lot of relationships, phone relationships with people. You know, I lived in Wyoming, and so we were in Region 8, and I had a lot of phone relationships with people in Denver or Washington, D.C., or mm, Cheyenne, which was the state capital. And so people I'd go to a meeting or a conference someplace, and I'd say, I'd introduce myself. I'm Alan Ohashi. She's, oh, you're Alan Ohashi. You don't look like an Alan Ohashi. You speak such good English. And so that I would get that. And
Hmm.
I also I also would you know, I obviously don't look like your typical Wyoming American, but
Hmm.
I'm a Wyoming native from Cheyenne, and I've lived only in Wyoming and in Boulder. And so
Hmm.
one time I remember I was in Jackson Hole. I lived in Lander at the time, and a bunch of carload of us came up to Jackson to a bar called the Log Cabin Saloon, and
Hmm.
we were watching the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band or the Dirt Band. I can't remember exactly what they're called that time, but I was in the head taking a pee, and some guy next to me says something like, "Oh, you don't drink beer, you rent it," because we were there, you know, in front of the urinals. And he said,
Yeah.
"Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, bunch of us came up from Lander, and came to see the dirt band. We don't get to see anything like that." And he said, "Well, you don't look like you're from Wyoming." And I said, "Well, I am from Wyoming." And he said, "Of course, well, your English is pretty good." And so, you know, I have on our blue jeans and boots, and you know, probably a baseball cap of some kind, and flannel shirt. So I was dressed exactly like he was, but of course, I looked
Yeah.
a little bit different. But
Yeah.
you know, you talk about you know, snappy answers to stupid questions. Uh, one time I was on an airline, and you know, there are those seats where you get the extra leg space if you can
Yeah.
pull the emergency window out. And so the
Hmm.
flight attendant comes over to me and stares me like this far into my personal space and says, "Can you speak English?" You know, loudly speaking to me, you know, slowly
My God, man.
enunciating right to my face. I said, "You know, I'm Japanese, not deaf." And so,
Oh man.
but you know,
Oh my God.
the explanation for the name is there's two explanations. One is, you know, it's called a macron. It's that line that goes over a long O or a long A
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
English. And so one explanation is the macron kind of got slid over between the O and the H, and so
Mm.
it became Ohashi. But the prevailing theory, and the one that makes the most plausible sense, is that one of my dad's school administrators or teachers thought he ought to be an Irish Japanese, and changed my record to be O apostrophe Hashi. And also coincidentally, my dad's birthday is on St. Patrick's Day, which is March 17th.
That's
So
funny.
nonetheless, I've been kind of carrying around this Japanese Irish thing with me since junior high school. So,
Yeah.
but it's also kind of an icebreaker, you know, like yourself. I've had to kind of straddle two worlds and learn how to be Japanese and then also live in the dominant cultural world. So it's at one level
Mm.
been kind of a positive thing where I learned I guess, cultural competency, or learned of myself as being diverse at an early.
Yeah, now that's interesting because like despite the fact that I didn't identify with my name not just because of the racial component. I When I was younger, I'm way more of a conversationalist now than was when I was a child. But when I was younger, I I kind of preferred books to people, and when people would start to say things that seemed ignorant to me, I just would feel like I don't want to talk to you and I don't want to explain myself to you and I don't want to tell you anything about me. And that was basically the kind of attitude I had when I was younger. And so the name almost felt like it invited in conversations I didn't feel like having. And so that was part of the reason why I didn't really associate with it or relate to it. And then also, it was the same name as my dad, and my parents divorced. And so my mom gave certain meaning to my dad's name that got transposed onto me when they broke up. And so it was also kind of a tension there. But fundamentally, when I decided to embrace it, one, I wasn't going to legally go through the process of changing my name to anything else. But also, I had gotten to a point where I decided that I don't know how woo woo we're going to get on this podcast, but this is Boulder, so I feel like I can get a little woo woo. I started to ask myself the question, what if I chose to be born as this person in these circumstances with this name and all the things that came along with it? And what if I just did a full embrace of everything that all the particularities that were a part of this package when I came into the world? What if I leaned into all of them 100%? Then uh, what kind of learning would I get from it? Like from that, like asking myself that question. And then what kind of responsibility would I have for the answers that showed up? And so I decided that I chose to be born with this name in a world where people would be like, what does that mean? Or why do you have that name? And so I would be able to come into those questions with kind of a fullness and an assertion that despite whatever they think my name should or shouldn't be, or what I should or shouldn't look like, or whatever the case may be, I am a fact. Like my existence is a fact. And any thoughts or questions they have about it, I'm the authority on who I am. So their brains are just gonna have to break or something because I'm just gonna be me, and they're just gonna deal with it. And they're gonna have to learn something new. So I basically is like I'm decided I'm just gonna be a walking education. Not because I owe anybody an explanation, but there's just a lot of ignorance out there, and each person is an opportunity to learn something. And so I keep myself learning, and if people are gonna be in my presence, they're gonna learn too, or get out of my face. One of the two.
The other day I was reading a meme on Facebook that says to Ernest Hemingway, and to kind of paraphrase, he said to write the hard stuff, dig deep and write about the hard stuff. And
Yeah.
so I think I have maybe a similar experience in that I grew up right after World War II, and where there was a Japanese
Yeah.
camp in Wyoming, near Cody, Wyoming, called Heart Mountain. And Japanese living in the interior of the United States, we didn't have to go to camps. We were considered to be interned in place. And so my family and the Japanese community in Cheyenne, were having to deal one day, and my parents, one day they were on the bowling team, next day they were kicked off the bowling team. And
It's
so
horrible.
it's and so when I came along with it, which would have been in the 1950s, my sister and I, we were brought up to be, American, and
Mhm.
Japanese was not spoken around the house, although my grandparents spoke Japanese. My parents spoke some Japanese and only spoke Japanese when they were with their parents. And it was not even an option to learn how to speak Japanese around our house. And about the only thing
Yeah.
Japanese around our place was a pot of rice that we would have, and some
Hmm.
Japanesey American food. But
Yeah.
over time, after I had gone through life and experienced the the drunken the bar in Jackson and the flight attendant on the airplane, and I've basically narrowed down my stories to those two stories of my experiences out in the dominant culture and how to deal with those. I've since written quite a bit and thought extensively really about my past and how I was treated and how I grew up and all that sort of thing. And so I have tried to reach deeper down and tell the tough stuff. And
Hmm.
I think that's what's made it easier for me to, confront the microaggressions that I still confront and the dismissiveness and all that other that continues to be out there. Although, I would say that most people don't consider themselves to be racist because
Right.
they don't burn down churches and they don't wear funny costumes. And,
Right.
and so they sort of shove that side of their themselves, that hard stuff about themselves aside, and
Hmm.
maybe around instances where they have to run into Alan or Pedro.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I want to jump on too is that both of us write, and I do believe that being able to write my thoughts and feelings have helped me to process in a way and metabolize some of the junk in a way that a lot of people just can't seem to do because they identify with the other people's stories of who they are. That was one of the things I watched, and I'd be curious to see or ask you about this with yourself. But I watched a lot of my friends get sucked into the prevailing narrative about who they were. And then, you come into the world an innocent person that kind of sees all kinds of possibilities and wonder and all these other things. And then some people start telling you stories about who you are and how you're supposed to be in the world. And some of us give into those stories. We accept those narratives. And I watch a lot of smart kids just kind of give in to the society's notions of who they were supposed to be. And it was almost like being in a war zone and watching friends get taken out by these basically these lies. And some of the interesting things about my background, which I'm super, super grateful for, is even though I was raised Christian religiously and a strict kind of Christian, part of my family was in the Nation of Islam. And so they always had these strong pro-Black notions of who they were. And I had that tempered with my Christianity. And so I was always going back and forth hearing the the histories and all the things that a lot of us deal with. I heard multiple sides of it, and it was always an argument, if you will, but a positive side of an argument. And so I had that as a part of my identity forming reality, but a lot of the other Black kids didn't. And so they just took what was handed to them. And I watched them just like giving up, trying to fit in or trying to be accepted. And I've been fortunate in that I don't feel I've had friends say this, and I've even had people try to project this onto me, like this idea of wanting to be white. But I personally have never felt that a day in my life. And I've had people say that they like project that onto me because I can be in majority white spaces, but I don't feel a feeling. I'm just like, I'm me. So everyone's gonna just have to adjust to my existence. But a lot of people feel like they have to blend in and they try to take away the language and say, don't speak your language or don't do this or don't do that. And I don't know. I wonder, did in your growing up with other, if there were other Japanese people, because you said Japanese community, so I'm assuming your family wasn't the only one. Was that a general idea of like assimilate and blend in as much as possible? And with your friends and the other people that you grew up with, did they easily assimilate? Was there some people who had harder times assimilating, or how did that play out in your upbringing?
There were other Japanese kids in my age cohort and in my family. They were engaged in the Japanese community, but there was an organization that was called the Skyline Japanese American organization that was in Cheyenne. Was started up just right after World War II, and GIs came back from being in the 442nd regimental combat team, which was all Japanese uh, uh, unit that fought mostly in Europe, in Italy and France. But anyway, they formed that group as sort of a place to be supportive and to be feel safe, even in a place like Cheyenne, Wyoming. And so I would say that after, particularly after Hiroshima and Nagasaki were annihilated by the atomic bomb, I think that really was a huge wake-up call for my parents. And so I would say that that was the biggest impetus for why there was were no Japanese around the house. And
Mm,
many of my friends were like that. I think for some I have cousins who live on the West Coast, and I think it was different for them. I think
mm,
because there was way more immersion into a Japanese and Asian culture in San Francisco. I think they had a different socialization than I did out in Wyoming and my other cousins who were in Salt Lake. But it was uh, it was a good childhood growing up. In fact, one level, I mentioned we always had like the family birthday party that was the Japanese stuff. We had,
mm,
Japanese food, just teriyaki chicken and maki sushi and stuff like that. Then we also had my American birthday, which was with the neighborhood kids, hot dogs and
mm,
stuff like that. And so I had to learn how to straddle both worlds really at an
mm.
early age. And I think I don't know if you got the talk, people talk about the particularly black kids getting to talk
Oh
about
yeah, yeah, for sure.
be obedient and blend in and don't make waves. I got that talk myself, and it was probably to a lesser degree than perhaps yours, but it was blend in, study hard, oh, don't make waves, always agree, sit at the front of the class, and all that. And so from that aspect, I think I was melded by the school culture, the dominant school culture at the time, because there weren't, I was maybe, it was maybe me. There's a kid named Robin Parr. He was a Lakota kid. Teddy Hernandez, maybe a couple other people of color, kids of color who were I went through school with. Of course, we had neighborhood schools, so everybody went through
Mm,
school in the same schools, so the same elementary school, Fairview, to Cary Junior High School, to East High School. And so from that standpoint, I think it was it was assimilation, but it wasn't anything that was resistant. Because
mm,
the melting pot idea is that okay, you blend in with all these people, and you'll learn the English language, and you'll have all this stuff in common, and then
mm-hmm,
you'll move on to a moment of success. Well,
mm-hmm,
that sort of happened, but at the same time, I always had to, I don't know about you, but I always had to do things a little bit harder. I always had to do things a little bit better. I always had to do a little bit
mm.
more than the other kids who, had more of a smooth sailing trip through academics.
Yeah, no, I always had stuff like that. But uh I've always had like a rebellious spirit, even though sometimes it doesn't look like I'm being rebellious on the surface. But I'll give you an example. So when my mom was a teacher, so was my grandmother. And so when I went to kindergarten, I already knew how to read. I already knew my multiplication tables, up to 16 times 16. And sometimes my grandmother would actually take me to school with her while she was teaching other kids. So then once I actually got into school myself, I was ahead of all the other kids in my class. And I thought every kid could read and do math and all. I had no idea that they didn't know all this stuff. And rather than I mean, I had a few teachers that noticed it, but for the most part, the teachers, it was a mix between, okay, well, you already know all this stuff, so just sit in the back and read and don't disrupt the class. Or the teachers would try to find things to diminish me. Say, okay, so this lady's gonna give me a C, even though I know I wrote a story. So then I decided, you know what? Whenever she gives me a C, I'm gonna treat it like an A, and I'm not going to like I didn't know, I knew no one was going to advocate for me anyway because of the school and the situation. I was like, yeah, no one's going to do anything, but I can do something inside of myself. So then whenever she would, and I'm sure she erased answers and did other things to give me low grades on purpose, which some teachers did to Black kids. Like straight up, I know 100% that it happened because it happened to some of my friends. Um, and I'll corroborate that in a second. But she kept giving me C's, and every time I got a C, I would go, yes. And I would just do like that. And then she would see her face like, what in the world? Because she knew she was effing with me. But every time I would be act like I was super excited and be like, yes, I got another C. And eventually she started grading my papers and grading my stuff correctly because it wasn't doing anything for her to give me the low grades. And I want to call her all kinds of names because I'm sure she did that to a lot of other kids or something of that equivalent. And she should never be a teacher. But people did stuff like that. And I pushed through it. And sometimes when I think about it, I'm bothered because I know that that energy still exists. But yeah, that was one example. And then one of my friends, she was half Korean and half Black. And she was always getting A's, but the other Black kids were failing in the class and in a different class. And then her dad came in to a teacher conference one time, and the teacher saw that my friend's dad was Black, and it's because my friend mostly just looked Asian. And all of a sudden, she started failing too, and that's why I know for sure they were doing that. And then the teacher was changing her answers. So it was sad, man. There was a lot of people that did crap like that, and I don't even try to get because some white people don't know, so they'll just say, well, it can't be that bad or whatever illusions, and I don't even bother trying to tell them one way or the other because I know they don't want to believe how bad it is. So depending on where I am and what the context is, I won't say anything if I think the person's just going to try to be like, oh, I can't be that bad or I don't want to believe it because I just know they're just stuck in wherever place they're stuck in. And then if other people have the relationship, then I might tell them more to explain. But there's so many people. Our whole society probably has been completely devastated from creativity and invention and all the things that we could benefit from because of people like that and putting us in those situations. So yeah, that's a long answer, but yeah, I've been through it a lot, and still it has happened as an adult.
Yeah, I started had a maybe a similar story when I was growing up. You learn how to read in the first grade. I don't know if maybe people learn how to read sooner, but I was a horrible reader. Still am a horrible reader, even though I write. But I think I figured out that I'm more of a auditory learner. Maybe I'm not sure
Hmm.
how that works, but I was always in the lowest reading group. That in where I
Hmm.
went to school, there was the sparrows, and then there was the robins, and then there was the eagles. So the eagles being, of
Hmm.
course, reading group. And I was always in the sparrows group or the titmouse
That
group.
is horrible that they would name it like that.
But as I got older, it turned out that I the fiction I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me. We had Dick
Hmm.
and Jane and Puff and Spot and
Hmm.
Mother and Father and see Dick run, 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 run.
Hmm.
But where are you running, Dick? And why are you going
Right.
there? I couldn't
Right.
figure out the stories. And
Hmm.
so basically it was just memorizing words and memorizing
Hmm.
patterns of words was what reading was about. And it turned out that we had the weekly reader that was given out to us during school, and I could read the weekly reader. I pored over the weekly reader because it was news and it was nonfiction. And so
Hmm.
had I been able to read the almanac or the encyclopedia, I would have been a way better reader if I didn't have to start out with Dick and Jane and Puff and Spot. And so I was maybe not a very good reader, but I was a really good speller. And so I
Hmm.
remember in the sixth grade, I was, you have to everyone is in the spelling bee thing. So I took the test, answered all the questions, and lo and behold, I was the best speller in the class, one of the top
Hmm.
class. And so we had the all school spelling bee. And
Hmm.
really smart kids, all the other kids in the Eagle reading group. They were
Mm-hmm.
against me down here and from the Sparrows, and I didn't win the contest, but I made it through a round or two. And people, my teachers just could not understand how someone like Alan in the Sparrow group could possibly be such a good speller. There must be something wrong. He must be,
Mm-hmm.
he must, he must have gotten figured out how to get an advantage over the other kids in some way. So
Yeah.
always that doubt that, or that, okay, he's not good enough, or if he is good enough, somehow there was something that caused him to, you know, I don't know if they maybe cheat. I don't know if I would be accused of cheating, but there was something that caused Alan
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. They all, I mean, so many people have so many goofy things. And I just got to a point where I realized it took me a while to realize this, that how much people frame the whole world through their own limited lens, and they just haven't had the exposure to see the world from multiple angles. And people are afraid often of not knowing, and so when they don't know, it puts them into some kind of existential terror. So like if you hear a person speaking a language that they're just like, I don't know what that person's saying, and their brain automatically is like, maybe they're saying they want to kill me, and so they're like, speak English, like whatever it is, because they're terrified of not knowing. And so they fill in the not knowing gaps with explanations that make them feel more comfortable and more safe. And I never underestimate the extremes of scared people to make S up. Like there's like just make stuff up, but it doesn't make me angry anymore. I just throw it in the they're scared box and just leave it over to the side. And then if I find myself in a context or a condition where there's enough psychological and sociological safety for a seed to get planted, then I might do it. But I don't even do it for me because I just don't. I'm just like, I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm not that young, and I'm at a point right now where I'm just and I have been for a long time where I'm just like, people are gonna do what they're gonna do, and they're gonna think what they want to think, and they're gonna be who they want to be, and I have no control over that. I only have control over how I show up, and then they can do with the information whatever it is they want to do with the information. I'm just gonna just be Pedro. That's what's gonna be. I'm gonna be Pedro, and then you're gonna have to deal with whatever comes up for you about that. If your brain starts hurting, you're like, I never met a black guy named Pedro. This is impossible. That's their problem. Okay, deal with it. Google it. There's like there's a lot of different types of people in the world with a lot of different experiences, and yours isn't the lens through which all things are filtered. That's basically how I look at it. And I just make sure, like with my own kids, that they are grounded in the deep sense of who they are, and that they don't ask permission to exist. And to me, the more people who can get to a point where they're just saying, look, I'm not going to ask permission to exist, so you got to deal with the consequences of the reality of me being here, then I feel like that's my job.
On that note, thanks for listening to episode 1 of our Black and Tan podcast. We hope you'll tune in again when we'll bring to light another intersection of a different beer and our personal experiences.
Thanks for listening to Black and Tan with Pedro Silva and Alan Ohashi. Join us next time for another insightful episode with stories in the context of a different brand of beer. Black and Tan is a Boulder community media production and available on many of your favorite podcast platforms.